I thought it would be just another quiet evening, the kind you forget as soon as the lights go out. But when my nephew sat down across from me in the living room and spoke so softly I almost missed it, the night took a turn I never expected, one that changed how I saw myself, my family, and the power of simply being present. Before we begin, I'd love to know, what city are you watching from tonight? Drop it in the comments so we can say hello. And if stories like this mean something to you, please consider subscribing to the channel and liking the video. It truly helps keep these stories alive. Thank you for being here. The living room had that familiar end-of-day stillness, the kind that settles after the sun slips away and the house seems to breathe out. I was sitting on the old sofa, the one with the slightly sagging cushion on the left side, a mug of tea cooling in my hands. The lamp by the window cast a warm circle of light, leaving the corners of the room in gentle shadow. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet, the distant hum of traffic softened by the trees. I'm a woman in my 50s now, though some days I still feel like I'm catching up to the years. That evening, I had been thinking about ordinary things, what to make for dinner tomorrow, whether my knees would complain if I skipped my evening walk. Nothing remarkable, nothing heavy, or so I thought. He appeared in the doorway without much noise, my nephew, standing there as if he wasn't quite sure he belonged in the room at that moment. He's grown now, taller than I remember, with a seriousness about him that hadn't been there when he was a boy chasing fireflies in the yard. He had been staying with me for a short while, between jobs, between plans, between versions of himself. We hadn't talked much beyond polite exchanges and shared meals. "Hey," I said, patting the empty space on the chair across from me. "Couldn't sleep?" He shook his head and sat down, hands folded, shoulders slightly hunched. The chair creaked softly under his weight. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking time like it always had, indifferent to whatever was about to unfold. My nephew joined me in the living room. I remember thinking later, and his words were quiet. At the time, though, all I noticed was the way he cleared his throat, as if gathering courage from somewhere deep inside. "Auntie," he said, barely above a whisper, "can I talk to you for a minute?" There was something in his voice that made me set my mug down. Not fear exactly, but a carefulness, like he was stepping onto thin ice. I nodded and leaned back, giving him my full attention. I've learned over the years that sometimes the most important thing you can offer someone is your silence. He stared at the rug between us, tracing a pattern with his eyes. The lamplight caught the side of his face, showing a tension in his jaw I hadn't noticed before. When he spoke again, his words came slowly, as if he was choosing each one with care. "I've been feeling lost," he said, "and I don't really know who to say that to." I didn't interrupt. I just listened. Men, especially, don't always get the space to say things like that out loud, especially to family. I could feel the weight of his honesty settling into the room, mixing with the quiet hum of the house. He talked about work that didn't feel meaningful, about friendships that had drifted, about the pressure he felt to have things figured out by now. None of it was dramatic, and yet all of it mattered. As he spoke, I saw not just my nephew, but a reflection of myself at different ages, sitting in different rooms, asking the same questions in my own way. I shared a little too, carefully. Not advice, not lectures, just pieces of my own story. Times I had felt uncertain. Choices that hadn't worked out the way I planned. I told him that feeling unsteady didn't mean he was failing. It meant he was paying attention. The air between us changed as the conversation unfolded, not charged, not uncomfortable, just present. There was a sense of mutual respect, of two people meeting in the middle of their lives, even if those lives were at different stages. I was aware of the boundaries between us, clear and steady, and within those boundaries was something solid and human. At one point, he finally looked up at me. His eyes were tired, but there was relief there too. "Thanks for listening," he said quietly. "I didn't know how much I needed that." I smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the lamp or the tea. Anytime, I told him, and I meant it. When he eventually stood to go back to his room, the living room felt different, not emptier, but fuller, as if something unspoken had settled into place. I sat there for a while after he left, thinking about how unexpected moments can open doors inside us. How connection doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. That night didn't end with any grand resolution. Life rarely does. But it marked the beginning of a deeper understanding, for him, for me, and for the quiet strength that comes from simply sharing a room, a conversation, and a moment of truth. The next morning arrived gently, the way mornings sometimes do when nothing is urgently wrong. Light slipped through the curtains in thin lines, and I lay there longer than usual, thinking about the night before. Not replaying it exactly, but feeling it. The quiet honesty. The way his words had landed and stayed. I moved through my routine with a little more awareness than usual. The kettle, the window over the sink, the sparrows arguing on the fence outside. When you reach a certain age, you start noticing how moments stack up, how one conversation can subtly tilt the rest of the day. He didn't come out of his room right away. I could hear him moving around, the muffled sound of drawers and footsteps. When he finally appeared in the kitchen doorway, his hair still slightly damp, he gave me a small nod. Not awkward, not overly familiar, just respectful. "Morning," he said. "Morning," I replied, sliding a plate toward him. "Coffee?" "Yes, please." We sat at the table, sunlight now filling the room, and talked about ordinary things. Weather. A neighbor's dog that barked too much. A news story playing softly on the radio. But beneath all that, there was an understanding, a shared awareness that something meaningful had already passed between us. It didn't need to be named again. Later that afternoon, the house felt unusually quiet. I was in the living room again, sorting through an old box of photographs I'd pulled from the closet. I do that sometimes when I need perspective. Pictures have a way of reminding you who you've been. I heard his footsteps pause at the doorway. "Those old photos?" he asked. "Yes," I said, holding one up. "That's me, about 20 years ago." Hard to believe. He stepped closer, careful, as if approaching a fragile display. He studied the photo, then smiled. "You look strong," he said. The word caught me off guard. Not pretty. Not young. Strong. Life required it, I answered honestly. He sat down across from me again, the same chair as the night before. It struck me how that spot had already become something of a meeting place. Not a destination, just a place where conversations seemed to happen. We talked more that afternoon, but in shorter bursts. He asked about my work back when I was his age. I asked about his plans, though I was careful not to press. The tone was easy, natural, like two adults learning how to relate to each other in a new way. At one point, he went quiet, staring at the window. "It helps," he said after a while, "seeing how you've handled things. Makes the future feel less intimidating." I nodded, feeling the weight of that trust. "The future doesn't need to be conquered," I said, "just met, one day at a time." That evening, the living room welcomed us back again. Same lamp, same sofa, same soft shadows. He didn't hesitate this time. He sat down without asking, leaving a respectful space between us. The television was on, but neither of us paid much attention to it. "I've been thinking about what you said," he told me. about not needing all the answers. And, I prompted gently, and maybe I've been too hard on myself. I smiled. Most of us are. There was a pause, not uncomfortable, just thoughtful. I could sense him settling into himself a little more, shoulders less tense, breathing steadier. I realized then that sometimes growth doesn't look like dramatic change. Sometimes it looks like sitting quietly and allowing yourself to be exactly where you are. As the evening wore on, I felt a shift within myself too, a reminder that my experiences, my missteps, my endurance, they still mattered. That being present for someone else could also reconnect me with parts of myself I hadn't visited in a while. When he finally stood to leave for the night, he hesitated. "I'm really glad I'm here," he said. "With you?" "So am I," I replied, and meant it more deeply than I expected. After he left, I stayed in the living room, listening to the quiet again. But this time, it felt different. Not empty. Not heavy. Just full of possibility. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that felt both new and familiar. We didn't talk about that first night directly anymore, but it lived quietly between us, shaping how we moved through the house together. Mornings began with shared coffee, evenings with small check-ins that meant more than they sounded. I noticed how he seemed steadier, and how I felt more awake to my own life. One afternoon, a soft rain rolled in, the kind that turns the world gray without making it gloomy. I was in the living room again, folding laundry, when he came in holding an old paperback book he found on the shelf. It was one of mine, dog-eared and underlined, a novel I'd read years ago during a difficult season. "You read this?" he asked. "I did," I said. "More than once." He flipped through the pages. "There's a lot marked." I laughed softly. That was me trying to understand myself. He sat down, book in his lap. "Do you ever feel like you're still trying?" "All the time," I answered. "The trying just looks different now." The rain tapped against the windows as we talked about books, about how stories can guide you without telling you what to do. He shared how reading used to calm him when he was younger, before life got noisy. I told him how, at my age, I'd learned to appreciate quiet more than certainty. Later that evening, the power flickered once, then went out completely. The house fell into darkness, sudden and complete. He laughed under his breath, and I felt my way to the drawer where I kept candles. We lit a few and placed them around the living room. The soft glow changed everything, making the space feel smaller, more contained, like the world had narrowed to just this room. We sat across from each other, candlelight moving gently across our faces. It was quiet again, but not the kind of quiet that presses in on you. This was the kind that invites honesty. "I used to think getting older meant shrinking," he said after a while, "like life closes in." "And now?" I asked. "And now I see you," he said simply, "and it doesn't look like shrinking." His words stayed with me. I thought about the choices I'd made, the resilience I'd built without always realizing it, about how being seen, even in this quiet, respectful way, could remind you of your own worth. I shared a story then, one I hadn't told many people, about a turning point in my 40s, when I had to decide whether to stay comfortable or step into the unknown. How scared I'd been. How proud I was now that I'd chosen growth, even though it wasn't easy. He listened closely, nodding, absorbing it all. When I finished, he didn't rush to respond. He just sat with it, honoring the weight of the moment. "That helps," he said finally. "More than you know." The power came back on eventually, the lights flickering to life, but neither of us rushed to turn off the candles. The evening had taken on a shape of its own, and we let it be. As the days went on, I noticed changes in myself too. I walked a little taller. I laughed more easily. Being there for him had opened something in me, a reminder that my experiences still had value, that my voice still mattered. One night, as he headed down the hall, he paused. "I feel like I'm learning how to be an adult all over again," he said with a small smile. "Aren't we all?" I replied. When I was alone again, I sat in the living room, looking around at the familiar furniture, the photos on the wall, the quiet spaces between sounds. I realized that growth doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives quietly, sits down across from you, and speaks in a voice you almost miss if you're not listening. And I was listening now, more than I had in years. By the time his last week with me arrived, the house felt changed in ways that were hard to explain to anyone else. Nothing physical had shifted. The furniture was the same, the walls held the same pictures, but the air carried memory now. Shared mornings, quiet talks, the kind of understanding that doesn't need reminders. I noticed it most on a Sunday afternoon, when the light came in low and golden through the living room windows. I was sitting on the sofa again, this time with a notebook in my lap. I had started writing things down, thoughts, fragments, reflections, not a diary exactly, more like a conversation with myself I'd been putting off for years. He watched me from the doorway for a moment before speaking. "You've been writing a lot," he said. "I guess I finally have something to say," I replied. He smiled and sat down, the familiar chair welcoming him like it always had. We didn't rush into conversation. We had learned by now that silence wasn't empty. It was a space that belonged to both of us. "I got a call this morning," he said eventually, "about a job." I looked up. "That sounds important." "It is," he said. "It's not perfect, but it feels like a step forward." "That's usually how it starts," I told him. "Rarely perfect, just honest." He nodded, thoughtful. "I don't think I would have taken it a few weeks ago. I would have talked myself out of it. And now I think I trust myself a little more." His words filled the room with something steady and earned. I felt proud, but not in a way that puffed me up. It was quieter than that, deeper, the kind of pride that comes from witnessing growth rather than directing it. That evening, we cooked dinner together, moving around the kitchen without getting in each other's way. It struck me how comfortable it felt, not dependent,